Hi, church. Thanks for taking a minute to view another Jesus is Better video. When you think about who you are, what comes to mind? Maybe your mom, or maybe you work as an engineer, or maybe you're a son or a daughter. There's lots of things that we can think of as we think about who we are. Do you know what the Apostle Paul thought of when he thought of himself? Well, he thought of something about him that was only true because of what Christ had done. If you think of the very first verse in the book of Romans, or the very first verse in the book of Philippians, you'll see this. Paul, when he thought of himself as a servant of Christ. The word specifically means a slave. Paul, as he thought about who he was because of what God had done for him, he identified himself first as a servant or as a slave, meaning he understood that all of his life was indebted to God because of what Christ had done for him. Christ had paid the penalty for his sin, and Christ rose again, and Christ gave him his life. And so now, more than anything else, Paul thought of himself as being a servant or a slave of Christ. And that identity is what drove all of his actions. Friend, as you think about being a servant, as you think about honoring the Lord in day-to-day life, then the very first place to start, the very first thing to think about when you think about yourself, is to recognize that you are a servant of Christ. And that is an identity before it's an action. And so, in all the service we do as brothers and sisters in the Lord, then we've got to ground that, first of all, in the fact that we are servants. It's an identity before it's an action. Now, if you want to start putting that identity to work, a great place to begin is at home. So think about the things that you do in everyday life and the people that you're around and interacting with, principally as people that God has put in your life in order for you to serve them, in order for your identity as a servant of Christ to be demonstrated in action. If you think that way about it, I think that you'll find experientially it's a wonderful thing to serve. The Son of Man came to serve, not to be served, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus is better, and it's through him that we too will learn to serve.